Welcome to LFPL's At the Library series, an ongoing podcast featuring author talks, programs, and events at the Louisville Free Public Library. For more information about upcoming events, visit us online at www.lfpl.org/upcoming events.
Now, I'm so pleased to introduce John Patrick Green. For those who don't know, John Patrick Green is not a bunch of animals in a trench coat pretending to have a human job. He is, in fact, a human person with a human job drawing a bunch of animals. John is a New York Times best-selling author who has worked on everything from Disney, comics, to video games, and now he's coming all the way from Brooklyn to speak to us today about his new book, From Badger to Worse. He's going to do some drawings and give us a wonderful talk, and I won't keep him waiting any longer. Let's all give him a big, warm welcome.
Wow, there's a lot of you in there. Okay. Hello, everyone. Okay. So I am John Patrick Green. I am the writer and illustrator of the Investigator series of books, which you're probably relatively familiar with. Let's see. Oh, okay, this works. Good. So Investigators is about these two alligators named Mango and Brash, who are agents of S.U.I.T, which stands for Special Undercover Investigation Teams. What that means, of course, is that they're detectives, but they're investigators. And what investigator really means is that they wear vests. But these aren't normal vests, these are VESTs, very exciting spy technology. These vests have all sorts of gadgets that can pop out and help them solve mysteries and catch criminals. And the vests also help them go undercover in all sorts of different disguises. So they can go undercover in jobs like orchestra musicians or chefs and construction workers and stuff. And as you all know, it's a book series. Specifically, it is a graphic novel series, and that's just a fancy term for comic book. Comic books are my favorite form of storytelling. You're probably familiar with characters like Spider-Man or the Hulk and Captain America. One of the most common types of stories in comic books is called an origin story. And an origin story tells you all about how a person came to be who they are, right? So if we take Spider-Man, for example, there's, of course, a number of Spider-Mans nowadays, but the original one was Peter Parker, and parts of his origin are that, he was just this normal teenager, and he got bitten by a radioactive spider, and that gave him spider powers, and with great power comes great responsibility. These are all parts of Spider-Man's origin story. And so I thought I would tell you my origin story, which is all about how I became someone who gets to make comic books. So my story begins when I was very little. This picture is hard to see because it's old. It's from the dark times. This is me in the very center in the stylish red and white checkered blazer. I don't know why my mom dressed me like that. But I was in about kindergarten. I was going into first grade. And I'm holding up a picture that I drew, and I'm showing it to my teacher. This is just to establish that ever since I was little, I liked to draw. This, of course, is true for a lot of kids. Usually early on in education, they have you doing a lot of drawing. But then as kids get older, they might find that there are fewer and fewer opportunities to just draw as part of class, of part of school, right? If you want to keep drawing, you might have to take extra classes or join clubs and stuff. And that was pretty much true for me. But one of the reasons why I drew so much back then was because I had really poor health, and I was often too sick to go to school. And back then, as I said, this was a long, long time ago. It was before the internet. It didn't exist yet. It was before Nintendo, so I couldn't stay home in bed and play video games all day. So there wasn't a lot to do except, read and draw. There were only 13 channels on TV back then. And you couldn't stream anything anytime you wanted, right? You had to, there was nothing but soap operas on. So as a kid, it was kind of boring when you're homesick from school. So I would read and I would draw, and one of my favorite things to read were a combination of words and pictures. And those, of course, were comic strips from the newspapers. such as Peanuts, and you might know Snoopy and Charlie Brown, Calvin and Hobbes. And of course, as I said, these were in the newspapers, and since there was no internet back then, I had to wait every day for a new newspaper. I couldn't go onto a website and just read them all whenever I wanted. But I basically learned how to read and how to draw as a little kid from copying comic strips from the newspapers. And so what I want to do is I want to draw, here, I'll move this over for now. I'm going to draw, let's move it right there. Oh, I'll try to, most people should be able to see it from there. Okay, I'm going to draw for you my favorite character from the newspapers when I was little, growing up. And we'll see how long it takes for everyone to recognize who this is. Now, some of you probably already know, because it's kind of gotten out who my favorite character was when I was a kid. But once you recognize who it is, feel free to just shout it out. I will hear you, so you don't have to keep shouting it. But you probably will anyway. So, anyone? No? Okay. I'll keep going. Okay, someone got it. Yes, it's Garfield. This is obviously the best drawing of Garfield ever because he's so recognizable. I will keep going. However, I will point out for the younger people in the audience that this also might look a lot like Fly Guy if you happen to read the Fly Guy books. And I always point out, Fly Guy wasn't around when I was a kid, one, and two, he's not in the newspapers. He's a book character. So this is specifically a character that started in the newspaper. So I'm going to keep drawing him. It is indeed Garfield. There you go. It's not going to be the best drawing because I'm drawing him really fast here. And this paper's a little wonky. But here we go. Garfield. Now it just needs details like stripes and stuff. Stripe, 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 stripe. That's right, he always kind of has a little bit of an attitude. There we go, there we go, there we go. Okay, there we go, Garfield. More or less Garfield. I'll go stand over here now so you can leave that up there. So Garfield, this is, of course, is a drawing of Garfield by the actual guy that created Garfield. I did not draw that one. I, of course, did not create Garfield. I was a tiny little kid, and I was copying Garfield from the newspapers. And this is what Garfield looked like in the newspapers. And one of the reasons why I fell in love with comic strips like Garfield is that they weren't just words and pictures. They combined words and pictures into this new form of storytelling. And you might not think of a comic strip like Garfield as really telling a story because comic strips are just, supposed to tell jokes. They're supposed to make you laugh, right? They're not really long stories. But if you think about it, something like Garfield was always set up in these 3 square boxes with the art and the words, and those basically make up the 3 parts of a story: a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so, they're short stories, but it's still storytelling. And so I would read these, and my parents would see me reading them, and they figured, well, any type of reading is good reading because it stretches that, reading muscle in your brain. And so they would buy me the Garfield books that would collect like an entire year's worth of Garfield strips. And I would just read them over and over again, and I would copy Garfield, and I would get really, really good at drawing them. I basically memorized how to draw them, and in about 3rd grade, so I don't know how old I was, 9? I don't know. 3rd grade, whenever I was healthy enough to go to school, I would still get bored during class or whatever. I would start drawing Garfield on the back of some homework or something. And, I would just draw him during lunch or whatever. And the other kids would see me drawing Garfield, and they would come up to me and they'd say, "Ooh, hey, can you draw Garfield for me?" And because I was little and I wanted to make friends and also kind of show off, I would draw Garfield for them. And then another kid would see that and say, "Oh, I want a drawing of Garfield." And so I'd draw Garfield for that kid. And then another one wanted one, and another one wanted one, and another one. And I finally said, "Give me $1 and I'll draw Garfield for you." And then they did. And so I was like, "Oh, hey, this is cool." Other kids started giving me money for Garfield drawings. And I was like, "This is great." And so I did that for a couple of weeks. And then the school started to get phone calls from parents saying, my kid came home hungry and they don't have their lunch money and they have this drawing of Garfield. What's going on at your school? As it turns out, kids were giving me their lunch money that they were supposed to buy, like school pizzas and chicken nuggies from the cafeteria. The school didn't like that. They were like, we can't have kids going home hungry. We can't be throwing out all these school pizzas that no one's buying at the end of the week. So they called my mom. Again, I'm in 3rd grade. They called my mom and they said to her, your child is not allowed to sell drawings of Garfield in school anymore. And my mom said, how dare you tell my child he can't earn a living? He's in 3rd grade. He's got bills to pay, right? But at the same time, my mom, she was kind of proud of me for figuring out I had this skill that I could already market as a tiny child. But she did say to me, you know what, JP, John Patrick, so they called me JP. She's like, JP, it's time to sit you down and give you the talk about copyright. Which is, if you look at this book, it says Garfield, and then at the bottom it says by Jim Davis. Jim Davis is the creator of Garfield. And my mom explained to me that there's this thing called copyright, which basically means if you create something, like a character or whatever, you're automatically given the copyright to it, which means you control who has the right to copy it and make money off of it. And to do it without permission is technically breaking the law. And so my mom was like, you're a criminal. She basically said, you know what, you don't have permission to make money selling Garfield drawings, so if you want to sell your art, you'd have to create your own characters. And so that's exactly what I did. When I was in 4th grade, I created these characters called the Footsies, which you might notice they have one very distinguished feature, which is that they all have kind of weird ears. No, they have very big feet. And the reason for that is because, when I was creating my own characters, I knew that I wanted them to be something that would be memorable the same way that Garfield is memorable. And so I figured, well, maybe I'll give them really big feet because that's easily recognizable. It's hard to forget. It's kind of funny, and I wanted my cartoons to make people laugh. And I would give them big feet and call it the Footsies, and that would be something that, would just stick in your head, right? It's hard to forget. So I took these characters and I started making comic strips with them, very similar to the Garfield ones that I was reading. I wasn't really thinking of them as being stories just yet. This was just when they were just jokes, right? But they're just short little jokes. And then none of them really connected to make any large narrative, but I would draw about 10 or 15 pages with these comic strips, and then I would photocopy them, and then I would staple them into booklets very similar to the Garfield ones that I was reading, and then I would sell the photocopies to kids at school. And I would just tell them, don't use your lunch money so I don't get in trouble again. And that was essentially how I got my start, when I was in 4th grade as a comic strip artist. Now, it was around this time that my brother, who's a couple of years older than me, he came home from school one day and he had a Spider-Man comic book. Now, of course, everyone knows who Spider-Man is. Spider-Man's one of the most popular characters on the entire planet. He's had movies and toys and video games and t-shirts and whatever, probably cereal, icicle pops, all that sort of stuff. And that was even basically true when I was a little kid. When I was a little kid in 4th grade, Spider-Man had already been around for about 20 years. He's, by today's standards, he's kind of an old character. And so I knew who Spider-Man was because there was a cartoon on TV, but I had never actually seen a Spider-Man comic book until my brother brought this one home. And when I looked inside, I kind of recognized something in my brain clicked, and I recognized the similarities between Garfield and Spider-Man. You don't really think of those characters having anything in common because one of them is a cartoon cat who likes lasagna, and the other is a superhero who probably also likes lasagna because lasagna is delicious, but Spider-Man doesn't make it part of his personality, right? Garfield, it's why he lives. Spider-Man, it's just whatever. But the real thing that they have in common is that they're both using boxes with art and words to tell stories. Of course, Garfield was always limited to 3 square boxes to tell a joke, And Spider-Man is using boxes of all different shapes and sizes, and there's pages and pages of them, and it's telling this long adventure story, this superhero story with good guys and bad guys and action and whatever. And so when I saw this, I said, ooh, this is what I want to do. I want to make comic books, not just comic strips. But because other kids at school had seen my Footsies characters, I figured there was some recognition there, and I would just use them, and I would start making comic books. I would start putting them into more adventurous situations. They would, get into danger and trouble and stuff. It would still be very cartoony. It would still be very silly. There would still be jokes and whatever. But I would play around with the shapes and the sizes of the panels for the art to be in, and I would do longer stories. I would draw about 20 pages of a story, and again, I would photocopy them and staple them together and then sell them to kids at school. And I started doing these in around 5th grade, and they got kind of popular. Other kids kept asking for more Footsies comic books. And that was when I discovered that there's a loophole to copyright, which is called parody, which means you can take someone else's idea, and if you do your own silly version of it, like you make fun of it or whatever, then you can get away with it. That's the loophole. And I was a fan of other comics like the X-Men, and so I thought I would do my own version called the X-Footsies, where I took all my Footsies characters and I gave them X-Men powers. So instead of Wolverine, we have Footsarine. This doesn't make any sense, but still. And there's other things like Footsie Trek, which was based off of Star Trek, where I just put my characters in the Star Trek universe. I even did one called the Teenage Mutant Ninja Footsies. The Turtles, they were brand new. Now they're like even older than Spider-Man was when I was a little kid at this point, but they were brand new when I was a kid, and so I did that. I made about 11 altogether of these Footsies comics. I did them from about 5th grade into by the end of 9th grade or so. So I made about 2 of them a year. I stopped making them shortly after starting high school because, as many of the older people might know, and the kids will soon find out, is that when you get to high school is when the adults in your life, the parents and teachers and guardians, they'll say to you, you have to plan for your future. What are you going to do with your life? Are you going to get a job? Are you going to get a career? Are you going to go to college or university and study something else, right? How are you going to support yourself when you're done with school? Get a real job otherwise. And I was like, well, I want to keep doing art. That's all I've ever been doing is making these silly little cartoons. But I wasn't sure if I could actually turn that into a job where I could, support myself. But I figured, well, there's plenty of different types of art. So I decided to go to art school. I went to this college called School of Visual Arts, and there I took classes in basically any other type of art you can possibly think of. They have classes in graphic design and animation and painting and sculpture and photography. Any art practice you can imagine, they have classes for there. And they even have classes on making comic books. So I took a couple of those as well, because I had been doing comics all by myself all along, and they're really, really easy to do because you don't need a lot of material. Even just as like a 3rd and 4th grader, I was making my own comics because all it takes is some paper, pencils, and an idea, and you can start making your own comic. But there are a lot of different steps that you do, when you're coming up with an idea. You have to create characters and plot, and then you have to come up with the drawings and the settings and all these different things. So there are a lot of different steps, which means that you don't have to do it all by yourself. You can actually team up with other people. Maybe you have a lot of ideas for, say, a good guy character, but you can't think of a good bad guy. And maybe you have a friend who has an idea for a bad guy, and you can kind of join forces and make the comic as a group. Or maybe you like to draw, but you don't like writing. And maybe you have a friend who likes to tell stories, but they don't like drawing. You can, make a team. And that's basically what happened to me when I was at School of Visual Arts. I met this other kid. His name is Dave Roman. This is a picture of him a little bit older than when I first met him. But when I met him in college, we discovered that we have the same origin story. And by that I mean that when Dave was a little kid, he was also really sick a lot, and he would make his own comics when he was stuck at home from school, and then he would sell photocopies of them to kids at his school. And it's just coincidence that we have this same origin story, because we're from different towns, we grew up miles and miles and miles apart. We never knew each other. We're slightly different ages, so we would have been in separate grades anyway, but we only met, when I was starting college. And because of that, we kind of bonded over it, and we thought it'd be fun if we made some comics together. So when we were in college, we started making this book called Jack's Epic, which is sort of like a twist on Alice in Wonderland, about a girl who follows a rabbit into another realm, and there's like magic and fantasy and robots and dragons. And then after that, we did a book called Teen Boat, which is about a boy that can turn into a boat. That was very much inspired by our love of Transformers. But we just thought it would be funny if it was about, similar to Spider-Man in a way, it was about a boy with this power and he could turn into a boat, because we thought, well, one, turning into boats is pretty cool. Not a lot of people can turn into boats, right? It's pretty unique. But at the same time, if someone here suddenly turned into a boat, everyone at first would be like, wow, that's amazing. How'd you do that? Do a trick. You're a boat. What are you going to do? There's no water. You can't do anything. Like if you were a car, you could do a donut, right, and peel out. If you were a jet, you could fly away. But boats kind of useless without water, so we thought it'd be a funny superpower to have because it's only good in certain situations. But because Dave and I made these books, by the time we got out of college, we were able to use that experience to get jobs making comics for other companies. My friend Dave got a job working at Nickelodeon. And I got basically the same job, but for Disney. Disney used to have this magazine called Disney Adventures. It was like a pop culture magazine for kids. It would cover kid movies and TV shows and music and stuff. And then in the back of every issue of the magazine, there would be about 20 or 30 pages of comics based off of different Pixar movies and Disney cartoons. And so I was one of the people that got to work on those. The way Disney would do things is that, as I mentioned, making a comic has a bunch of different steps. And so Disney would do it like an assembly line, where they would have one person do the writing, one person do the drawing, one person do the coloring, one person do the lettering, and sometimes even parts of those steps are even broken down even further. And then that way you have a whole team of working on a comic, basically all at the same time. And that generally makes it go faster, right? So when the artist, after just drawing in black and white, 1 or 2 pages, they would then send it on to the colorist, and the colorist would color those pages while the artist is drawing the next batch of black and white pages. And that makes the process take less time than if one person was doing it all by themselves. So I was at Disney doing things like coloring comics like this one, this Monsters, Inc. comic I did the colors for, but other times I would be writing comics. I wrote a lot of Kim Possible comics, if anyone remembers Kim Possible, Toy Story comics. I drew comics based off of Phineas and Ferb for a very long time. I was there at Disney for about 10 years, which at this point does not seem very long. But for my audience, it's a very long time. And after being at Disney for so long, I was kind of reminded of what my mom said when I was little. I was doing nothing but working on Disney characters, and I thought of when my mom said, instead of drawing Garfield, you should create your own characters. And I hadn't done that in a very, very long time. Even when I was working with Dave, it was as a group. I had not created my own stories in a long, long time. So I left Disney when I had this idea for a book called Hippopotamuster, which is about a hippo that leaves the zoo to try out different jobs. And this was kind of inspired by my own experience of leaving a certain zoo, Disney, and trying out the next part of my career as an artist, which was going from doing just comics with other people's characters and back to telling my own stories and longer stories. And so I did this story of a hippo that tries out all these different jobs. And after that book came out, it did well enough. It made some money and people liked it that I got asked by the publisher if I had any other ideas for books. And so my next idea for a series was called Kitten Construction Company, which is about these kittens that want to do construction, but no one would hire them because they're adorable little kittens. You wouldn't think that a kitten that had gone to architecture school and has the skills and talents to build complex structures, but these kittens do, but they just constantly have to prove it to everyone, right? So I got to do 2 of those books, and then again, they did well enough that the publisher said, hey, what other ideas for books do you have? And so at this point, I had to think about what I wanted to keep drawing and what types of stories I wanted to keep telling. And I realized I like drawing animals more than I like people. More than I like drawing people. People are fine. I like drawing animals. I still have to draw people in my stories, but there's just something about drawing animals that's more fun. I think it's funny when animals are wearing clothing. I don't know if you've ever seen a TikTok where someone dressed their cat up like a pirate. To me, that's funny, especially if the cat's not into it. And I like stories about jobs because I find that they're basically relatable all over the planet, right? Every culture has chefs and construction workers and firefighters and things like that. And so using that as a framework for a story means that there's a wide range of audiences that can find something that they relate to and they understand. So these were the 3 criteria I wanted my next idea to have, and I just had to think of one for each. And something, I don't know what, but something reminded me of that old joke, what do you call an alligator that solves crimes? An investigator. And this just seemed like the perfect idea because I had all 3. I had the animal with alligators, I had the clothing with vests, because they're investigators, and I had the job of solving crimes. And the best part about that job is that they could go undercover in all sorts of different jobs, which means I would have lots of different stories that I could tell. So now I had this idea for a book, and I told it to the publisher, and they said, well, that sounds good, but show us how you can turn that into a book. So now I had to actually create characters and stuff. And so I knew my characters were going to be alligators, but they didn't have a design, they didn't have personalities, they didn't have names. And whenever I start with a new book, I usually just start doing sketches of who I think the main characters might be. And so I started drawing an alligator, and I drew this one alligator. These are the first ever drawings I did of the characters that would later be named Mango and Brash. I started drawing them before they had names. And I drew one with a rounded snout. And after that, I realized, well, I need my alligator characters. I want them to be as recognizable as characters like my Footsies or a character like Garfield, right? And I drew one with a rounded snout, and then I realized, well, the other alligator has to look different so you can tell them apart. And I thought, well, round things are unique in that they're basically just one side, one continuous side, right? And so I thought, well, maybe then the other alligator should have an angle. And because this one had a round jaw, I decided to give the other one a squared jaw. And so this way, their heads at least look different. And I thought, well, that's easy. That makes it easy enough to tell them apart. But after drawing that, you can also see, for anyone who is a stickler for this sort of thing, you can also see that technically they're crocodiles. There are alligators in my mind, but they're in-universe, they have an abnormality, which is that they have teeth that go both up and down, which is a characteristic that only crocodiles have. But I didn't know that, so I'm just wrong. But anyway, so after drawing one with the round snout, one with the squared snout, I thought of well, those are kind of opposite shapes, so maybe they should have opposite personalities. And I thought, well, the one with the squared jaw, squared things have corners, and corners can be sharp. And sharp things mean business, and that's why you don't run with scissors, right? You want to follow the rules, because otherwise you're going to get hurt, and you're going to get in trouble. So do things by the book. And that made me just think that the square jaw one would be the rule follower, the rigid one, the one that's not really movable, because round things can roll, and they're smooth, and they're fluid, right? And so now that made me think of their personalities. And I figured, okay, well, the square jaw one, he would be the serious alligator, and that means the rounded jawed one would be the funny alligator. And that's how they got their personalities. And then I gave them the names Mango and Brash for a number of different reasons. But one was because it just seemed to fit, because the word mango is, of course, not common for a name. It's kind of a silly thing to be used as a name. It's, of course, a fruit, but it sounds kind of cute. There's something non-threatening about the word mango. It kind of sounds like a gerbil or something, right? A name you'd give a cute little pet. And the word brash, of course, means someone who is, bold or stubborn or likes to do things a very specific way, and maybe they're a little rough around the edges, a little difficult to work with. And that just seemed to fit. So now I had my characters. I had their looks, I had their personalities, and I had their names, and I just had to write the story that they existed in. And so what does writing look like for me when I'm coming up with one of my books? When most people think of writing, they just think of like typing words on a keyboard or writing out on some lined paper, and that's true. That's what writing can be for a lot of different authors, even ones who are also illustrators. But for me, when I write, I basically write like this, which looks terrible. But I basically just write by using stick figures. And there's really nothing wrong with drawing stick figures. It's very, very helpful, actually, because you can actually just tell an entire story by drawing stick figures. And that's what I do when I start my stories, when I start my comics, is I write out the entire thing as these stick figures, because a lot of times when I think of my stories, I see them in my head. I see the images. I see it happening a little bit, kind of like a movie almost. And so a lot of times I see the story before I even know what characters are going to be saying. So I will draw out all these stick figures, and then I'll write out the words, or more like scribble out the words, as I think of them, until basically I get the whole story out, which is like 200 pages, which is very, very long. But the benefit of doing an entire book drawn like this is that stick figures are still pretty quick to draw. They're generally pretty easy to draw. And so if I get anything wrong and have to do it over again, it's not a big deal if I have to throw out the entire page and start over. And after I write the entire book, I have to turn it in to someone called an editor, who I like to tell kids that for me, I have a person at my job, an editor, who is very similar to a teacher that you might have at school, in that I do all my work, which is writing and creating my book, and then I turn it into them, and then they will, I don't magically turn it into them. I deliver it to them. And they will read it over, and they will tell me if there's anything that they think I should change to make it better, or like improve the story. The same way that, say you wrote an essay for school, the teacher will read it over, and they will mark it up, and they will tell you, here's how you can improve this, or whatever, here's how you can get better and learn and whatnot. And so that's the role that an editor serves for me, is that they help me get my stories to be as good as they can be. And then once everything is kind of like given the thumbs up, like, okay, your story is as solid as it's going to get, they give me the green light to redraw everything. So I use those sketches as a guide to then redraw the entire book page by page. I start by drawing it in black and white. As you can see, the previous page and this page, they're very, very similar. This one just looks a lot nicer. But I draw it in black and white, and then after I draw about 10 or 20 pages in black and white, I scan them into computer, and then I email them off to a colorist who, if you remember how things worked at Disney, it makes it all go a lot faster. I color very, very, very slowly. And so I hire someone to do the coloring for me because they work very, very fast. And I'll give them notes. I'll say things like, it's daytime, so make the sky blue and stuff. And while they are coloring that batch of like 10 pages, I can be drawing the next batch of black and white pages. And that makes the entire books get done a lot faster. Usually it takes me about 4 months to do all the art, and about 2 months to do all the writing, and that's why the books come out twice a year, because it takes about 6 months to do each book. And then after everything is done, all the pages get collected with these nice fancy covers. There are now 7 investigators' books that are out, that are currently available. All Tied Up was the most recent one that came out last September. The next investigators' book is called Class Action, and that one comes out this September, towards the end of the year. And there will be more after that. But if you haven't figured out yet, Mango and Brash go undercover at a school. But this isn't, of course, the only book series that I'm doing. There is the spin-off series, which is the one we're actually here to talk about. And that is called, of course, Agents of S.U.I.T, which first started last year with the first book, which did not have a subtitle, but that one was about Cilantro the chameleon. And the newest one, From Badger to Worse, is about these 2 badgers named Bongo and Marcia, who were first introduced way back in the second Investigators book, Take the Plunge. They were originally introduced as kind of foils for Mango and Brash, but in this book they get to go off on their own adventure. And astute viewers might remember when they were first introduced, they actually were completely identical, but in this book, I wrote a whole scene to justify why they now look different, so that they're easier to tell apart, because no one at my publisher could tell them apart. And I was like, no, you keep labeling them wrong. And then this Bongo is the one with the pink nose and the fuzzy ears, and Marcia is the one with the cow lick and the darker red, smaller nose, just so you know. Now you know, and you'll never forget. But anyway, so Agents of S.U.I.T, I don't do all by myself the way, not including color, the way Investigators is done. Agents of S.U.I.T is done with a couple of other collaborators. And the way that works is that I generally will come up with an idea for the story. I will write down all these ideas I have for like plot points or jokes or characters. A lot of times I will draw stuff out. I will draw like pictures of what I think new characters will look like and stuff. And then I will hand over, it's 30 pages of material to Christopher Hastings, which is the co-writer, and it's kind of up to him to make sense of everything that I write and turn it into a script, which looks very much like, if you've ever seen a movie script or if you've done a school play, it looks a lot like a script for that, where it includes stage direction or description of what the scene is, along with all the dialogue that every character says. And then after Chris and I go back and forth finalizing the script, we send those pages off to another artist named Pat Lewis, who then has a process very similar to mine, in which he starts off with these sketches that clearly are a lot better than my sketches, in that they look almost like the finished art that he does. But, eagle-eyed viewers will notice there are a couple of little mistakes, little things that need cleaning up here and there, things that are a little sketchy or details that are missing. But Pat will send me these pages, and then I'll look them over and I'll tell him if there's anything I need changed or want changed. Such as on this page, I looked at this and I saw this sea orb up here, if you know sea orb. Sea orb, of course, is a big, giant robotic eyeball who every now and then has arms, like an eyeball would, of course. But here, Pat drew sea orb with just the one arm showing, and I was like, well, that looks weird. An eyeball with one arm? I don't know, that's kind of disturbing. I was like, can you give Sea Orb 2 arms, like a normal eyeball? And of course, Pat was like, yeah, sure. And then he drew, and then I saw that. I was like, okay, thank you. Okay, good. That looks right to me. The giant metal eyeball with 2 arms. Thumbs up. So then Pat, he will clean up all the art in black and white, cleaning up the lines and stuff. And then just like my own books, these pages, the black and white ones, get passed off to the colorist, whose name is Wes Joba. And then, so it's the same colorist on both books, and that helps everything look very consistent in universe. And he will hand back the pages and look like this. And of course, these are pages from Cilantro's adventure. I didn't want to spoil anything from the new book. And then these will, of course, all the pages will get collected into nice, fancy covers. At this point, these are all the books that I have worked on where I was either the artist or the writer and the artist. I haven't included any of the Disney work because that was always like collaborative with a whole bunch of different teams and stuff, and they weren't really my creation. These are all books that I helped create or co-create in one way or another. And there are more books on the way. The third Agents of S.U.I.T book, which doesn't have a title yet. We still have to figure out the title, but it's a little more than halfway done being drawn. That one will be out next February, almost exactly a year from now. The 8th Investigators will, of course, be out this September. There will at least be 3 more Agents of S.U.I.T books, and then at least another 3 Investigators books as well. So will keep me busy for like the next 6 years or something. So I'm going to be doing these for quite some time. But if you can't wait until September to get a taste of class action, there is this event in May, in the first weekend of May, called Free Comic Book Day. And they will have a sneak preview of the first like 30 pages or so of class action for free. And I think it's like the first Saturday in May. So if you go to almost any comic book store, will have them, and you can get it for free. And again, as you can see, they are in school, and they have to deal with dodgeball. So that is essentially my entire origin story of how I began as a kid in 3rd grade, making my own comics and then selling them to kids in my school. And I went from that humble beginning to now being a professional author who still makes his own comics, and I spend a lot of time selling them to kids in school. So I kind of peaked in 3rd grade, but I've made it work for me, and my mom's very proud. So thumbs up for me. Thank you. So now we can do Q&A. So if you have a question, there's a microphone. If you want to orderly line up, no one trample anyone. And then whenever you're ready, ask your question. And try to keep it a low rumble just so we can hear.
So my name is Perry, and I really have a real good question.
Okay.
So when C-Orb is like without arms, I'm like, what the flippin' heck? So I'm just wondering if C-Orb had arms all the time, I would be a little happier. That's just my opinion.
That's you. Oh, you want C-Orb to always have arms?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So the no arms. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Next question.
Who's your favorite character to draw?
Who's my favorite character to draw? My favorite character to draw might be Dr. Doodle Doo, who is a big giant chicken who's a scientist. He specializes in lasers. He works at the science factory. Yeah, giant chickens are just fun to draw, apparently. So he's my favorite character. Next.
Is there a way you can give us a hint of what the main character is going to be for Agents of S.U.I.T Book 3?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so the 3rd book, as we saw, the first one was primarily cilantro, and the second one is primarily the badgers. In the first one, with cilantro, we are introduced to a sheep named Zeb, who decides to join S.U.I.T at the end, and he's just in training. He's just a junior agent. The 3rd book is much more of an ensemble piece, so the badgers will be in it, cilantro is in it, and Zeb is in it. Zeb is kind of like the one who is suspicious about something that's going on with Agent Monocle, who, after you've read the first book and after you read From Badger to Worse, you'll realize that something, Monocle is having her own little adventure that will then become the big mystery in the 3rd book. So the 3rd book is like this very big epic with all the characters, basically.
Okay.
Thank you. Next. Hey, how's it going?
My name's Henry. So, do you have any more footsie books? By the way, I just finished this.
Oh, cool. What'd you think?
So,
You like thumbs up?
I realized that Monocle.
Oh, no spoilers. No spoilers. Don't spoil it. But you can ask a question. Just don't spoil it. Will it spoil what you're gonna say?
In the last book with cilantro, I saw a cube, completely useless bionic eyeball.
Yeah.
In the last page, I saw Cube's eye. I saw Cube's eye.
Right. The reflection, right?
In the reflection, it had. I can't remember his name.
Oh well, his name is Tract.
Tract.
Yeah, he's General Inspector Tract, also known as GI Tract. It's not much of a spoiler, but because he was the head of S.U.I.T in the first book, which came out a year ago. He was the head of S.U.I.T long time ago, and he died, and he's a ghost. So now he's a gaseous form, appropriate. But yes, so there's a big long story arc. But your first question, what was your first question? I forgot what your first question was before you asked about the book. Oh, the Footsies, yes,
yeah.
the Footsies books. I still have the original art. Like they were never like sold in stores really or anything. I still had the original art, and a number of years ago at this point, I scanned it all into computer just to make sure they never got lost to time, because paper gets old and tears and all that sort of stuff. So I did keep them all, and I did scan them all, but they haven't been published. They're too inconsistent. They might get published at some point, I don't know, when I'm dead. Someone will say, hey, look, here's the original art that this guy who did Investigators for 50 years did. I don't know.
I mean, after this, I'm kind of really getting interested in the footsie books.
Okay,
so
I'll keep that in mind.
I want some footsie books. I want some footsies.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. When I'm done with Investigators, I'll see if I can do more footsies books. So thank you for your question. Next.
This question is the easiest question in the world.
Okay.
Can I get that Garfield picture?
Oh, the Garfield picture. The Garfield picture will be given to either the bookstore or the library. I think it might go to the bookstore, and then they might have, maybe raffle it off or something, or maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll give it away to someone today. But I will let them figure out what to do with it. Maybe they'll have a battle royale, I don't know. Oh, this is my marker. I don't want to lose it. Next question. Hi there.
I was wondering if you would do if you would make any more X-Footsies books.
Oh, any more X-Footsies with the X-Men? If I ever do revisit the Footsies, we'll see if I do them purely as a specific parody or something. But as I mentioned, I'll at least be doing Investigators books for another 6 years or so, which is quite a long time at this point. So you might be too old. You might not even care by then, by the time I get around to them. But we'll see. We'll see. Thank you for your question.
Have you have any reference of Daryl the crocodile?
Oh,
Daryl.
Yeah, Daryl. Will there be more Daryl?
Yes.
There will be more Daryl. You might have to wait a little while. You kind of see little bits of them here and there, sometimes just in Brash's memory and stuff. But there will be more stories where you get to see Daryl before he became Crackerdile, because as we all know, Daryl got turned into a big giant cracker, and then a waffle, and then a stone, and then, but...
Good.
Yes, but there will be more of him eventually, yes.
So...
Thank you. Next question.
Who's your least favorite character?
Oh, who's my least favorite character? Well, I'll tell you, the character who, bizarrely, is my least favorite to draw is CC Boring Stories. And I'll explain that. I did mention that I don't like drawing human characters as much as I like drawing animals. But CC... she looks like a very, very simple character, because she's just basically like an oval head with a kind of just generic haircut. But it's like I drew her head once, and I was like, that's perfect, that's great. And then every other time I tried to draw it, I couldn't get it right. Like there was just something weird about either the shape of the placement of her eyes, or like the angle of her hair or whatever. And like it would always frustrate me. I would draw it and I'd be like, it doesn't look right. It doesn't look like her. It just looks weird. And so I will literally just take that one head that I drew, and then I will trace it each time so that it looks like her. I don't know what it is about her. She's just frustrating. So she's the one that I like drawing the least. Next question.
Have you ever thought of making a third gator, like another?
Oh, a third gator. I have given it some thoughts. It hasn't really kind of percolated yet into something for a story, but it might be something down the line. And I was thinking maybe, there are other types of crocodilian creatures that are all related. There's caimans and there's gharials and there's stuff. So there might be a third, alligator type character at some point.
Yeah,
you just have to wait.
Because it might be good to have a trio and just another character in the series.
Oh yeah, like an 80s sitcom. I will have to introduce a tiny little child character, and that's when they will all say, "Jump the shark." But we'll get there at some point. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, this is kind of a statement.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure
Yes.
Brash is a crocodile, not an alligator.
Yes, as I mentioned, I do draw him with, not in that picture, but I do draw him with teeth going both up and down when he closes his mouth. And I think Mango, I've done it a couple of times. But with Brash, I've retconned the reason for it, which is that he was such a big admirer of Daryl, his former partner, who is a crocodile, that he would start emulating his behavior, and that's why he has the thing. But also, as we saw in book 4, Ants in Our Pants, when we get not so much a flashback, but there's a bit in Brash's memory where he starts as a little baby, and he grows up really, really fast, and there's a part where he has braces. So I'm there is actually a scene that I'm writing where Brash goes to a dentist, because he's been having toothaches or something. And the dentist is going to say, you have teeth that go both up and down, like a crocodile. Do you have any crocodile in you? Since he's an alligator. He's like, do you have any crocodile in you? And he's like, I don't think so, but I have been in a crocodile, because there's that part where Waffle Dial ate him.
Yeah.
So I am gonna address the fact that it's been pointed out to me so often that I draw him as a crocodile. So good observation.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Next question.
When exactly are you going to make the other books come out?
Oh, when am I going to make them come out? Well, each one takes about 6 months or so to make, and so they come out about 6 months apart. Of course, by the time one comes out, it'll have been almost a year and a half since I finished making it, because books, in addition to how long it takes me to make the book, it also takes books a very, very long time to get printed and then shipped all across the country into stores and libraries and schools and stuff. So it takes a while. But for basically every February and September for the next 4 or 5 years, 6 years, something like that, there will be a new book out.
I have a second question.
Okay.
Where exactly did you get the idea of the badgers and the chameleon?
Oh, okay. So Cilantro the chameleon, who is orange. If I go back here, there you go. Cilantro is orange. So Cilantro came about because when I made the first Investigators book, and I was working on the second one, my editor and my publisher, they couldn't tell Mango and Brash apart initially when I was working on the first book, and I colored them in these 2 different greens, and they were like, I can't tell these alligators apart, and I'm like, she's like, they're both green, and I'm like, but they're different greens, and she's like, I can't. She's like, can you make one of them orange? And I'm like, no. But so I didn't make one of them orange. But then when I was doing the third book, because Cilantro first appears in the third book, and she's a chameleon, I'm like, I'm going to make her orange as kind of a slight joke pointed at my editor. But that's also why, so Mango is green, but mangoes, the fruit, are kind of an orange color, right? And cilantro is a green herb, so I decided to make her orange. So they're kind of like, because initially when cilantro was conceived, she and mango were kind of going to be characters that had gone to spy school kind of at the same time, but ended up on sort of different career paths, and they were going to have a little bit more, kind of rivalry stuff going on, which we might end up seeing. I might explore that a bit, but that's why cilantro. How I came up with cilantro, and for the badgers, I basically just wanted other characters. I wanted to make fun of the names Mango and Brash and do other characters with similar sounding names. So that's why there's Bongo and Marcia. And in the first book, there is a joke where a security guard asks to see the alligator's badges, and Mango's hard of hearing, Mango heard badgers. And so there's a joke about it, and then I make the same joke in the reverse in the second book, where the security guard, where the alligators show up and the security guard says badgers, and then they show their badges, but the security guy is like, no, there are already badgers here investigating. And then, so that's why Bongo and Marcia are badgers. So that's how they came about. Thank you.
So, I've got a couple of questions.
Okay.
So, one of them is, why is the current general inspector's nose made of metal?
Oh, okay. So the current general inspector, his name is Mo. He's G.I. Mo. He wears this metal nose. And basically, when I was creating him, he's based off of Dabney Coleman from the movie Cloak and Dagger, and I just made his nose metal. So a lot of elements from the book are kind of inspired from like spy movies, like James Bond and old like Dick Tracy and stuff. And and there are characters in like James Bond movies where it's like, oh, this character is called Jaws and he has metal teeth. And I just thought there was like a trend where characters would always have like one little metal part of them. That's why like Sven Septipus has the one metal arm. And so I just thought a metal nose was kind of funny. But in Class Action, the book coming out in September, there's not exactly an explanation, but there's sort of a little hint where you get to see a little bit of the General Inspector's history before he became a super spy. There's a little bit of a hint of how he might have suffered a repeated nose injury. If you remember, there was this cover shows dodgeball. So really he has the metal nose mostly because he's been hit in the face a lot. So that's kind of, but it's not explained. You kind of have to figure it out yourself. But anyway, yeah.
So, another question is, will you ever reverse Dar-Isle's transformations?
Oh, will I reverse his transformation?
Yeah, like will like the head scientist ever invent like a machine to like put him back into a crocodile version?
Well,
or alligator version, or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, sort of. There will at least be attempts to try it, because if you remember in book two, that's when the Combinotron device was created that can combine things together. And then at the end of the book, they turn it into an uncombinotron that can take things apart. So it might be it'll come up again. It'll definitely come up again. Okay,
thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you. Next question.
So, what is your favorite ever investigative story that you've written?
Okay, which one is my favorite? My favorite, it kind of changes every now and then, but my favorite is probably Heist and Seek, the yellow cover one, because it's about a art heist. This famous art goes missing from a museum, and the investigators go undercover. Mango goes undercover as an artist, And because I grew up making art and I went to art school, I was able to kind of put in a lot of like jokes that were a little bit more personal and stuff. So this one has a little more of myself in it, I would say, in a way. There's even a scene where you see a flashback of a character to when they were a kid and they were drawing pictures of Garfield. So you have to look at it really close and you see that they're drawing Garfield in like this one shot in the book. So I even used part of my own origin for that one. So that one's probably my favorite because it's kind of the most personal for me.
I have 2 more questions.
Okay.
What's your least favorite investigator story?
My least favorite investigators? Well, that's kind of tough. That also kind of changes. Every now and then I think, maybe Take the Plunge isn't as strong as I think it was. But then I'll reread it and I'm like, no, this is great. We just did, so we're recording. This isn't necessarily a surprise because I know it's public info because libraries told me they're already ordering it. We're doing audiobooks of the Investigator series. They start recording this week, actually. So I had to like reread the script to the first 2 books, and it's a graphic novel being turned into something that's just audio, right? In graphic novels, they don't have a lot of description of what the pictures are because the pictures are there. But when you're turning that into audio, you have to write out what's in the pictures. You have to describe it so that everyone can understand what's going on. So I reread it there, and that's when I was like, this is actually pretty good. I don't know why I think that one's so weak. But yeah, it's always hard to tell. A lot of times my least favorite investigator's book is the one that I'm working on at that moment because it's always like, I gotta get this done. I gotta meet my deadlines. But then once it's done, I'm like, I love this book. Yeah.
If you go back to the dodgeball class action,
yeah.
General Inspector, is it like hinting it when it's almost hitting Mango's nose?
Well, I mean, yeah, Mango is just using the magnifying glass to deflect, but that's not exactly what happens to the General Inspector. It's just sort of implied that when you find out a certain detail about the General Inspector's youth, you might realize, he probably suffered a lot of unintentional sports injuries or something.
Okay.
Okay, this
okay, sure. If possible, just keep it to 1 question because we're running low on time. So.
Actually, you know what? It's not even a question at all. It's a song.
Okay.
I got it from Pete the Cat. Here it goes.
Wait, is this copyright infringement?
It's gonna be fine. I promise. Okay.
Just...
Oh, so alone. No one's at the other end of the phone. Oh, so alone.
Well,
never mind. Maybe not that song.
Well, that was very good. Do you have an actual question or a comment?
Oh, of course. Hang on. This is a question that is not about the books, but I think you'll love it. What is your favorite color? Actually, I have more than one.
What is my favorite color? My favorite color is possibly blue.
I like that color too.
Yeah, I think ultimately, not like consciously, I just always find that I'm always using blue or have blue things or whatever. But it's probably blue. So thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Applause. Next question.
Yeah, I would really like to do
You can always ask me a question back when I'm at the table too, if you think of something else. Okay.
Do you know the author of Dogman, Dave Pilkey?
Well, I don't know him personally. However, I have worked on the Dogman books because the font the lettering that is used at the beginning of the books and at the back of the books for like the biography pages and stuff, I designed that font. I made that font. And they actually use that font when they're re-lettering all the foreign versions, in different languages and stuff. So I have worked on the Dogman books, but I've never met him.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
When is the next investigator's book going to come out?
Okay.
Like in the next year or two?
The next investigator's book, Class Action, comes out, the very last one there, that one comes out in September, so towards the end of this year, and the free preview comes out in May at Comic Book Stores.
I meant like which date of the September?
Oh, what day? I don't know the precise day. It's towards the end of September, so It's probably like the 25th or 26th or something.
Thank you so much for everyone for coming out. We're going to have a signing at the back of the room. Let's give a warm thank you to John Patrick Green.